I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you?
I'm no one. There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
May the Force be with us.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
Ojaba. Why does she get a blaster and I don't? Ojaba.
All right, who wants to talk a little Star Wars? It's episode number 109 of the My Nerd World Star Wars podcast. I am your host, Jon Justice, for another look. It's a weekly look at the stuff about Star Wars that I like. It's really the simplest way to put it. Hey, I saw The Last Jedi for the 9th time over the weekend. And, hey, I love that movie even more the more that I see it. I love that movie so much. I wanna meet Rian Johnson. I have specific questions that I want to ask Rian Johnson, and then I want to give the man a big old hug because he made an amazing Star Wars movie. And I can't thank the man enough because I love that movie. All right, so on the show this week, we're going to talk Solo, a Star Wars story, and all of the things that we have not seen, which is pretty much everything. No, I want to spend some time because this is actually really, really interesting to me. I want to spend a little bit of time, and I will, talking about the marketing or lack thereof of Solo, a Star Wars story. And how I am convinced that this is Disney doing one big, massive test run. So I'll get into the details of that. We will talk Last Jedi. We're going to talk a bit about the Oscar nominations. The Last Jedi was nominated for 4 Oscar nominations, and by and large, I could give a rip about the Oscars. I don't care. I think the people that run the Academy are a bunch of pretentious old people. No offense to old people, but a bunch of pretentious individuals who usually end up liking movies that maybe I've seen once but I'll never watch again, or movies that I've never seen before. However, when the things that I love are nominated, like Star Wars, I tend to get interested. So we'll talk about the 4 Oscar nominations The Last Jedi got. I watched Looper for the first time since seeing The Last Jedi. I own the movie. I've seen it many, many times. And actually remember watching it when it was first announced that Rian Johnson would be directing episode 8. And I went and watched that movie and thinking to myself that it was a really, really good choice based off of what I'd seen in the film. I was looking at it, though, through specifically a visual lens because there's an aesthetic to Looper that says Star Wars to me. And I'll talk a little bit more about this. This wasn't an episode, a while ago. This was back when Rian Johnson was first announced to be directing episode 8. But going back and watching Looper again actually sheds quite a bit of light on Rian Johnson's style, the comparisons of Looper and The Last Jedi, and more specifically, Rian Johnson's handling of relationships that I thought was really, really interesting because it provides a bit of further insight, at least in my opinion, to the decisions that he made in the directing and the writing, and redemption as well, the possibility of redemption in The Last Jedi. Also, finally watched The Empire Strikes Back in its entirety since watching The Last Jedi, and wow, a movie that I've seen arguably hundreds of times. I'm not looking at it differently. The Empire Strikes Back still has the same sort of weight and love for it that I've always had, but there was a little bit of a perspective shift, and it's a really good example of how people, in my opinion, are treating The Last Jedi unfairly. And again, this is coming from an angle of everybody is entitled to their opinions about the film. If you don't like it, you don't like it, whatever. But don't get on me for liking it just because I do. I do think that a lot of the criticism is unfair for those that say will like a whole bunch of stuff in The Empire Strikes Back, but yet not like a whole bunch of stuff in The Last Jedi, even though it's really kind of the same stuff. And then we'll get into listener feedback. Several more comments, emails from individuals chiming in on the show, which I really, really appreciate. As always, you can email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Leave a comment up on YouTube, and you can always find the podcast, depending on where you listen to it now. If you're looking for something a little bit more convenient, you can find it on Podbean, iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher, and YouTube as well. And if you email me and you don't have a way to listen to it any of those ways, I'll just send you an MP3 copy, because that's the kind of host that I am. One more programming note, just so you're aware, if you are subscribing to whether it's, any of the outlets that I just mentioned, Podbean, Spreaker, Stitcher, YouTube, iTunes, I do other podcasts. I haven't in quite a while because I've just been focusing on doing my full-time job as being a radio talk show host, and then the Star Wars podcast. But I am a big NASCAR fan, and there will be Ryan Blaney is the driver that I follow. Used to be Dale Earnhardt Jr., but he retired. So I'm now following a driver called Ryan Blaney. The plan is I'm going to start back up my weekly Ryan Blaney podcast. Also, I'm a massive Depeche Mode fan, and had started a Depeche Mode podcast that I intend to start back up here in the coming months. I only mention that because if you subscribe to any of those outlets, I obviously would like you to keep listening to the Star Wars podcast, but just be made aware there'll be some other non-Star Wars podcasts that'll be coming along the feed. It's just easier because I keep them all under the My Nerd World banner. So just as a programming note, but again, that'll be several weeks down the road, and hopefully it won't become a pain in the butt for you. I mean, a lot of shows do that. I wish I could separate them all out and do different feeds, but different feeds for everybody, but it's just not all that feasible. All right, so that's the last sort of non-Star Wars related item that I'm pretty sure we're going to talk about. Let's go ahead and get right into the show.
I've seen this raw strength only once before. It didn't scare me enough then. It does now.
I want to talk Rebels for just a moment because I don't normally cover Rebels, the TV show, on the podcast. I usually stick to the movies specifically, okay? I don't deviate all that often, unless it's something big. But if you do watch Rebels, I wanted to mention briefly that Rebels is coming back for the last run of episodes on Monday, February 19th. I'll have to be watching it on Tuesday nights because it's going to be on too late on Disney XD for me to watch it on the night that it premieres. But my understanding is we're going to get like 2 weeks of double headers. So we'll get 4 new episodes, and then we're going to get an hour-and-a-half finale to the whole series. This is it. I love Rebels. I almost like Rebels more than Clone Wars. And that's kind of unfair. They're very different shows. I do love Clone Wars a lot. There's a lot of Clone Wars, and almost too much Clone Wars. But I really do love what Dave Filoni has done with Rebels and these characters, and I'm really cannot wait to see what the conclusion of this series ends up being. Ahsoka and Hera are my 2 favorite non-film characters in all of Star Wars. Even though Hera she's mentioned Captain Syndulla, she's mentioned in Rogue One, and Ahsoka is just barely number 2 to Hera being my favorite non-movie character in the Star Wars universe. I love both of those characters. So I'm really excited to see how they wrap it up. I know that I'm going to be shedding tears come the end of this series, just based off of where we all kind of expect that it's going. But I just wanted to mention it briefly for those that watch. When the series is finally over, I'm sure that for the episodes coming up, I'll probably spend a little bit of time on the podcast talking just a bit about Rebels. But again, I hadn't talked about it yet, and if you were wondering why I didn't kind of cover that in the newsier portion of the podcast, that would be the reason why I try to strictly stick to the movies for the sake of the show. So, and again, that's Monday, February 19th. They just released a brand new 30-second trailer that didn't really show a whole lot of new footage apart from the mid-season trailer that came out last week. But I'm really looking forward to seeing this series wrap up. And then we've got more TV Star Wars. We know we're going to get a show at some point, and I believe we're getting another animated show. And I have no idea what era they plan on doing these in. So I'm really excited to see what some of those announcements are. Now, speaking of announcements, we still have received absolutely nothing for Solo: A Star Wars Story. And so I want to take a bit of time and talk about the lack thereof of a marketing strategy. Okay, so let's start with what we do know. For those that don't follow the Star Wars Leaks Reddit page, which I'm on many times throughout the day just to see the latest news, for the general public, the only thing the general public has seen at all of Solo: A Star Wars Story is the yellow logo that has shown up, the poster that has shown up in some theaters. That's it, with the May 25th release date. For those that aren't aware, I'm sure most of you who are listening to the show know this, but the Han Solo movie was supposed to be directed by Lord and Miller, and for various rumored reasons, they were taken off the film, and Ron Howard, our understanding is Ron Howard came in and reshot some 70 to 80% of the film. There was a lot of controversy and speculation swirling around that Lord and Miller, and again, I've covered this on other shows, but that Lord and Miller essentially had a falling out. That Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm and Disney wanted to bring somebody in, much like they did Tony Gilroy, with Gareth Edwards, who directed Rogue One, to kind of spruce up the film, and that Lord and Miller didn't want to do that. We've also heard that it may have been less about that and more along the lines of Lord and Miller, because you had two very distinct creative individuals at the helm of this movie, it was taking twice as long to get the decision-making process worked through for creating the movie, and it was just taking entirely too long. It seems like it was an amicable split, because Lord and Miller have made public comments where it sounds like even for the wrap party that they were either there or involved, so it doesn't seem like there's any ill will. I don't think Lord and Miller are going to be directing a Star Wars movie anytime soon. And there was some speculation, too, that Lord and Miller were basically shooting a lot of improvisational scenes on top of the scripted dialogue that Lawrence Kasdan had written, and that they really wanted them to stick to the script. So they brought in Ron Howard, and Ron Howard's an amazing choice for directing this film. And I can't wait to find out, what it's going to look like when we end up seeing something. So the only thing the public has seen has been just the logo, essentially. For those that have been following any of the leaks, there has been a bit of artwork that's released that shows the Emilia Clarke character, who we know's name is Kira, and that's QUI-RA, and then Lando, and then we've got Han Solo, played by Alden Ehrenreich, and then Chewbacca with a picture of a modified, newer, because this is taking place prior to A New Hope, Millennium Falcon. It's got a longer nose piece on the front. It's got panels on it where the other panels were missing before. Looks really, really cool. This is all that we have seen apart from behind-the-scenes photos taken by, outlets like TMZ, and also a series of the Lego that are coming out that just show a handful of the vehicles that are going to be in the movie. So you get a bit of the design aesthetic of what they're going for with the Solo movie. Very much, in my opinion, design-wise, looking like it was lifted from A New Hope. I mean, it's certainly from that era, and it looks like for some of the speeders that we've seen again in the behind-the-scenes photos, some of the different troopers. We have new troopers again that we haven't seen before. The same thing they did with Rogue One. I mean, it all, from an outside perspective, I'm just looking at behind-the-scenes shots and toys. It all looks great, but we have not seen a single shot or anything from the film. We also know that there is a trailer out there. Anthony Bresnikan of Entertainment Weekly, who handles all the Star Wars stuff for Entertainment Weekly, was asked about a week ago about a trailer, and he said, essentially, a trailer is pending, but just not yet. A lot of us thought we were going to get it a couple weeks ago. We didn't. Said the one's coming, stuff is coming soon, but we just haven't got it yet. There was a lot of speculation that we were going to get it for the Super Bowl. However, Deadline reported yesterday that the movie studios and what trailers they were going to be showing. And so far, Solo's not listed at all. Now, there is a possibility that later on this week, when the Star Wars show comes out on Wednesday online, for those that don't watch the Star Wars show, it really is fantastic. Andy Gutierrez and Anthony Carboni, they host it. It's usually about 10 minutes long. A YouTube show shows up about noon Pacific time on YouTube every week. Really is just a fun show. A lot of great interviews. They get cast, they get the director, they break news on there. They were showing stuff from The Last Jedi, stills, and things like that before the movie came out. Just a really, really fun show for those that don't watch it. Last week was a bit of a wash because they basically filmed it. Well, they didn't basically, they did. They filmed it on one of the Disney cruises, and so there really wasn't a whole lot to it. So there is a possibility that come Wednesday, they could announce that, hey, we're going to get the trailer this weekend coming up. I'm sensing that we're not going to get the trailer for the Super Bowl. And I can't believe I'm saying that because I really am shocked that we have a movie that's about 3 months away and we still have not seen anything from it yet. But the reason why I don't think we're getting it for the Super Bowl is, one, because of what Deadline reported in the list of trailers that we know we're getting. Disney's got a couple of open availabilities, but it looks like they're going to be promoting Infinity War and probably Black Panther, which comes out here in a few weeks. Even if they dropped a trailer for the Super Bowl, it would just end up being a 30-second trailer telling people to go online and watch the full trailer online. They did this last year for the latest Pirates of the Caribbean movie. But the reason why I don't think we're getting it for the Super Bowl is because, one, I don't think we need it. I don't think the Han Solo movie needs it at the Super Bowl. Two, because Anthony Bresnikan mentioned that he had some inside information on it, I would have expected, unless it still happens sometime today, but I would have expected that the trailer would have been preceded by a photo spread from Entertainment Weekly. We usually, and we have, for all the other Star Wars films of the modern era, Entertainment Weekly has, ahead of the first footage, released an expose of photos. And they do it a week early because when the magazine goes to print, Anthony Bresnikan, over the course of a few days before it comes out on newsstands, will put up the articles and the photos that are going to be included in the magazine by the end of the week. And they do this because they know that once the magazine goes to print, the photos and the articles are going to leak out anyways, and so they get it up online so that they can at least get the clicks for it and not lose all of the attention that they should be getting for covering it. I would have expected that we would have gotten that this week leading up to a debut this weekend during the Super Bowl. Okay, so when are we going to get it? I honestly don't know. I would guess that there would be a trailer in front of Black Panther, which comes out on Friday the 16th. So that's not next weekend, but the weekend after. I believe that's correct. Let me double check. Okay, so you have Black Panther coming out in the UK on the 12th, okay, and then you have it coming out in the US on the 16th. My guess would be that we're going to get through Super Bowl weekend, okay? If it doesn't drop this weekend, and again, I don't think it's going to, I'm going to guess that next week, Entertainment Weekly is going to release the first photos. Because Disney's never, for one, they've never waited this long for any promotion. But two, they've never waited this long to not release anything. Okay. But I also think this is part of their grand experiment, which I'll get to here in just a second. But if I had to guess that coming up on, say, Monday the 5th, so next Monday, we'll get an Entertainment Weekly spread, and then speculation will begin to build, and we'll probably get the trailer by the end of next week so that it has time to debut in front of Black Panther in the UK, and then they'll have it for the 16th release here in the United States. We also know that an IMAX version of the trailer has been approved. Somebody that works in the industry had tweeted out that yes, indeed, an IMAX trailer for Solo: A Star Wars Story has been completed. So here's my thought on the marketing strategy for this, and why I think this is one big grand test for Disney and Lucasfilm and what they are doing. They want to see what's going to happen by waiting as long as they are, since this is the first time that we've had two Star Wars movies opening up within this short of a period of time of less than a year, essentially 6 months between the two. And the reason being is because this is going to happen again. It won't happen next year. Okay, we'll get Solo: A Star Wars Story in May, and then we're going to have to wait all the way until December Solo this year. And then we're going to have to wait all the way until December of 2019 before we get Episode 9. I do believe, however, that more than likely we're going to end up getting another Star Wars movie in May of 2020. In which case, we're going to be back in this time frame again. And what I think Disney and Lucasfilm are doing is I think that they are testing the waters to see what impact it's going to have on Solo: A Star Wars Story for a spin-off movie by waiting as long as they are before they put out anything. Right now, they're still trying to milk The Last Jedi for all it's worth, right? And you might stop and go, well, Last Jedi is, has been out in theaters now for a while, and it's leaving a lot of theaters, and so why would they wait as long as they are for doing this? And well, because it is still in theaters. People like me are still going to the theater to go and see The Last Jedi. We have the wrap-up of a very popular cartoon, right? Animated series that is going to be wrapping up and starting its run here on February 19th, and I think that they're waiting as long as they can, and they want to see, in my opinion, if it has any impact not running a trailer at the Super Bowl to see what happens with this movie. They can probably take this risk because this is the only time they're going to have the opportunity to go and do this. I also think another part of the reason, too, is, this is pure speculation on my part, is that we know that Ron Howard did scheduled reshoots for the movie just like within the past couple of weeks. I don't think they want to repeat what happened with Rogue One and how all those trailers differed from what was actually in the film. Now, granted, it didn't have almost any impact, in my opinion, at all about Rogue One, except for the fact that as a fan, I was kind of annoyed that there was so much footage in those trailers that did not end up in the movie. And most of that was because there was still a lot of production going on with the film and re-editing. And I think Disney sees the opportunity here, with Last Jedi still being in theaters, and the fact that they're still kind of cutting the movie, wait until what they believe is the very last minute and then go full on with promotion all the way to the film and see what happens. I think that Disney wants to know. It's a little experiment for them. Solo is the one Star Wars movie that the people want to see the least. So it's the perfect title to go and do this with. If this was something like an Obi-Wan Kenobi movie, I think would be in a much, much different situation. where they would want to be promoting it ahead of time. And you could make the argument either way that with Solo, they should be doing more pre-promotion. But I think it's going to be Last Jedi's done. They don't want to have any confusion. They want to wait until it's almost completely gone from the theaters. Rebels is now into its final few episodes. And then they hit us upside the head with a full trailer and photos to get us hyped for this movie. And guess what? It comes out in 3 months. That's what I believe is happening here. And everybody's going nuts because how can they do this? How can they wait so long? Well, the only reason why we're saying those things is because Disney's never done this before. Disney's never waited this long for any promotion, or Disney and Lucasfilm, for any of the movies. They've never waited this long before they began promotion on a film. And so the only reason why we're kind of all up in arms going, what's going on? This is going to be a failure. It's just because this is completely uncharted territory. But it is. It's completely uncharted territory. You've never had 2 Star Wars movies that have, been released this close together. And I do believe it's going to be successful. I think there's going to be a lot of hype for this film, and having a short period of time to hype it before people go and see it, I think is going to be to their benefit rather than dragging it all out. And remember, Solo doesn't have the speculation power that the saga films have. And like I said a moment ago, I'll just repeat myself. You can make arguments either way, right? You can easily make an argument that they should have been promoting this a year ago with fantastic footage to get us all hyped and just to have, we want to see more because the other stuff was so great. You can make that argument, absolutely. But you can also make an argument that you don't need to. Give it 3 months, put out a full trailer, put out a bunch of TV spots, and just hit the throttle all the way to the May release date. And trust me, there'll be people lining up and buying all their tickets just as early for this movie and selling out all the showings on first night, just like they did The Last Jedi. And if anything, I think the Solo is going to end up benefiting from the fact that The Last Jedi was so divisive, because people are going to be curious what they did with this one. And there's going to be a big segment of the fandom that's going to probably really like this movie because it probably is going to feel more like fan service. And it's not going to take as many risks as some would say The Last Jedi took. So that's my speculation, and I'm sticking to it. This is all part of Disney's big, grand experiment of a marketing plan. And that if it works and Solo ends up being a success and they end up hitting all the numbers that they've been writing down or typing into a computer that they want to hit on opening weekend for the run of this movie, that you'll see this exact same scenario play out when Episode 9 comes out and whatever spin-off film is supposed to be released in May of 2020, Disney will do this exact same thing. Now, if it doesn't work, I think they'll probably end up adjusting their marketing plans. You know what the best thing about all this scenario is that we'll probably never be told specifically what the marketing plans were, whether or not it did or didn't work, or it was planned. So either way you look at it, I'll end up being right. That's kind of cool.
Fulfill your destiny.
All right, I'm going to be really cheesy radio guy here and say, will it be The Last Jedi's destiny to pick up an Oscar? Yeah, that was really lame. I apologize for that. The Last Jedi did pick up, though, however. 4 nominations for the Oscars this year. That'll be on, March 4th? March 4th, is that right? So, sound mixing, sound editing, visual effects, and original score, John Williams. The original Star Wars, released in 1977, received 10 nods and won 6 Oscars. The Empire Strikes Back received 3 nominations and won 2. Return of the Jedi nabbed 4 and won 1. The Phantom Menace captured 3 nominations. Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith both received 1 nomination. And The Force Awakens, kicking off the current trilogy, received 5 nominations, the most since the original Star Wars. I'm reading the article off of StarWars.com, and it says, congrats to all the nominees. Last Jedi, written and directed by Rian Johnson and produced by Kathleen Kennedy and Ram Bergman, has taken the saga in bold new directions and perhaps most importantly also brought us porgs. We're grateful to everyone who worked so hard in bringing it to life. You know, it's funny they mentioned the porgs because I dig the porgs, and I know people are still kind of keen on the porgs, but remember all the hype about the porgs going into the movie? And people were all worried about them doing too much with them, and guess what? They did exactly the right amount of porgs. I'm a bigger fan of the Crystal Foxes, the Vulptics, Vulptixes, I think they're called. I like the crystal foxes. I wish we would have seen more crystal foxes. The porgs are cool. I have one staring at me right now. But for me personally, I kind of dig the crystal foxes. Sorry, had a bit of a brain fart there. So, look, it's cool. It's cool to see your movie that you like so much get nominated. Sound editing, sound mixing, absolutely. The movie sounds fantastic. The visual effects are spot on. I've got no issues at all whatsoever with the visual effects. It's interesting, and then of course the original score from John Williams. I think the soundtrack for this movie is fantastic. My favorite theme from the movie is Fun with Finn and Rose. I really love that. They call it a motif, but I really love the melody in that piece of music from the soundtrack. One quick point, and then we'll move on because I'm looking at the clock and running out of time, and I got other stuff I want to talk about. But it's funny. The end of The Last Jedi reminds me a little bit. This isn't a dig by any stretch, but it reminds me a little bit of Geonosis and Attack of the Clones. I've always had a problem with Geonosis and Attack of the Clones because I don't like how they washed out the sky in orange. I've always been of the opinion, and I know why they did it to make it look different, okay, and I get the reason why, but I always thought it gave it too fake of a feel, and I wish they would have had like a gray or blue sky to it, but I understand there probably would have been some complaints comparing it to Tatooine. The end of The Last Jedi, when they're in the middle of the sort of the samurai face-off between Kylo Ren and Luke Skywalker, takes on a very similar feel because of that sun going down. I just thought that parallel was really, really interesting. Not so much at the beginning of the Battle of Crate, but that scene in particular where the two of them face off, because it is at twilight, the sky ends up getting that sheen on it. It looks fantastic, by the way. There's those shots at the end of the film that, again, I wish I just had a poster of. They're so amazing, especially one where you see Luke from behind and right before the walkers go and fire on him. I mean, that just looks absolutely spectacular.
Something inside me has always been there.
All right, I watched Looper for the first time since seeing The Last Jedi, and once again, it was one of the most enjoyable experiences watching that film that I'd had, even though I've seen it several times. Just seeing Rian Johnson's specific style and the way that he shoots his films, and both Looper and, well, actually, Brothers Bloom, Looper, and The Last Jedi, they all have a very distinct tint to it. J.J. Abrams' The Force Awakens has a very crisp sort of feel to the way that it's filmed, much like all of his films do. I love the way that J.J. Abrams films look. Stripping out the lens flare that he usually puts in all the other films, because if you put the lens flare in the Force Awakens, it ends up looking like the Star Trek movies did. But you strip that lens flare out, and it really does feel like a Star Wars movie. And oddly, The Last Jedi, to me, visually, not so much camera angles, but more of tint, reminds me more of A New Hope. It has this just slightly muted's not the right word, and brown's not the right word, but it is just slightly muted look to the movie. And I mean, it just makes the movie just absolutely look gorgeous. But beyond that, the one thing that I picked up on watching Looper that I thought was interesting that related to The Last Jedi was the fact of how Rian Johnson treats relationships. And spoiler alert for those that haven't seen Looper, but, Looper is basically a time travel movie, and you get a young version of Bruce Willis's character, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and then you get Bruce Willis playing the older version. And the older version of his character ends up falling in love with this woman who cleans up his act. And there's a really great moment in the film where the old Bruce Willis meets his younger self, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and they have this conversation in a diner, and he's telling the older version of this character is telling his younger self, he's like, look, you're going to find this woman, and you're going to soak up her love like a sponge. Basically saying, even though you don't deserve it, because he's a drug addict in the film, he's hooked on this drug and crime, and this woman basically he falls in love with her, she falls in love with him, and she ends up cleaning him up. And he's trying to convince his younger self that, we need to correct this because you need to find this woman because she's going to mean the world to you and is going to end up loving you in ways that you didn't even understand, undeservedly so. And what I love about that, and what to me it reminded me of in The Last Jedi, was this idea of redemption. Because you like this character, and yet he's not exactly, he's a good dude, but he's not really a good dude. He's a good guy, but he's flawed, right? He's got a girl, his younger self has a girl that he likes a lot, but who's a hooker. And he's making a bad choice there. And it only is when he gets older that he ends up being redeemed by this woman who gives him her love. And it almost reminds me, and it's a bit thin, but it reminds me a bit of Kylo Ren. One, in the fact that in Looper, he does something very similar to Ben Solo, Kylo Ren, in that you end up forgiving him without even realizing it throughout the movie for his bad self. Like, at no point during Looper am I not kind of rooting for this guy, even though he's kind of an awful person. And Rian Johnson's got a very, very unique style and writing that gives you the ability to feel sympathy for these characters that are obviously dealing with flaws. And I'm sure I've mentioned it before, but I find it amazing in The Last Jedi that we end up, without even realizing it, at least for me, forgetting the fact that Kylo Ren killed Han Solo. I mean, I still have a problem seeing him being fully redeemed and living. It's going to take some really clever writing to get that done without having to deal with some fallout for having killed his father. But, by the end of not by the end of the movie, but towards the end of the movie, when there is that moment between Kylo Ren and between Rey, right? I mean, this I won't play the whole thing, but this moment.
It's time to let old things die. Snoke, Skywalker, the Sith, the Jedi, the Rebels, let it all die.
You in that moment, you don't want him to do that, right? We're put in the position of Rey in that moment when she's saying, "Ben, don't go this way." I remember watching the movie for the first time, and then subsequently in the other 8 viewings, watching that whole scene play out, just go, man, you big old dummy. Why are you doing this? But we're only doing that because, and I'm only saying that because I've now not forgiven him, but I've seen a path that he can take. The act of killing Snoke and teaming up with Rey, because we love Rey, right, was almost enough to go, okay, now we're going somewhere. And here's this dummy staring at this girl who still isn't getting it. But we only get there through the writing of Rian Johnson and the scenes that we, even with Kylo telling Rey after she calls him a monster, going, yeah, I am a monster. I don't know about you, but when he says that, I'm almost thinking that the way he's saying it is like, yeah, I am a monster. Like he's admitting it. Like it's not a good thing. Yeah, I am a monster. And you could follow that up with, I really wish I wasn't, but I really kind of am. It's very interesting watching Looper, seeing how he handles that relationship and how he ends up handling redemption. And again, spoiler alert, at the end of Looper, the younger self, the older self ends up going too far. It's a really weird role reversal that takes place. You're kind of rooting for the older self to convince the younger self to do the right thing, but by the end of it, the older self is about to do something really, really bad when the younger self decides, okay, I'm going to handle this and take myself out to remove myself from the equation. And it really, the themes that Rian Johnson puts forward, to me, speaks volumes to how he looks at relationships and redemption. Here's the thing that I want to wrap up this particular point on. because I don't think we'll have time to get to listener feedback this week, and I do want to talk a bit about The Empire Strikes Back. Here's the thing that I wanted to land on, is that who knows what we're going to get in Episode 9. It would have been fascinating to see what Rian Johnson would have done with Episode 9, especially where he took those characters of Kylo, Ben, and Rey. There's a part of me that really wishes that Rian Johnson was going to close it out. At the same time, I don't care because I love Star Wars and I do love J.J. Abrams. I'm curious what he's going to do, and I have a lot of faith and trust in J.J. Abrams because he handles relationships really, really well, in my opinion, too. So I don't know if we're going to end up going to a place that Rian Johnson would have gone in resolving that relationship between Kylo Ren and Rey if J.J. Abrams would have done the same thing. But the thing that lends me comfort regardless of what happens in Episode 9 is that, man, we're always going to have The Last Jedi. And even if the only really good emotional scenes that we ever get, intimate scenes between Ben and Rey, are in The Last Jedi, at least we had them in The Last Jedi, and they're really good. Those Force shipping scenes and the scene in the hut with the finger touching are really, really good scenes. And I find myself as a fan who loves the action, who loves the vehicles, who thinks the opening of The Last Jedi is the best opening ever, just because I love that whole scene of the bombers and Poe Dameron and all that. I think it's fantastic. I find myself liking the simple, quiet moments between Ben and Rey the most in The Last Jedi out of everything in that movie. And it shifts from viewing to viewing. Sometimes I'm watching the battle at the end going, this is the greatest. Sometimes I'm watching the beginning going, this is the greatest. The last time I went to go see it, I was watching those scenes between Ben and Rey, just going, oh, these scenes are so good. The way it just goes silent and they just have these moments and the conflict of these two individuals trying to figure out how they really, really end up feeling about one another. It's really, really great. So regardless of what happens with Episode 9, we'll always have Episode 8. And man, I'm out of time. I talked too long about Han Solo. That was my problem. The good news is I can scratch out what I did right and I can save the rest for next week. Thanks so much for checking out the show. Next week, I will talk a bit about watching The Empire Strikes Back for the first time since The Last Jedi, and maybe what you need to do is go watch The Empire Strikes Back if you haven't recently, and then you can we can see whether or not you ended up picking up on the same things that I did. Also, we'll do listener feedback. So between now and next week, feel free to drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter at Jon, Jon Justice, and on Facebook as well, Jon Justice, at Jon Justice. Let's see. Talk Show Nerd. I took care of that. Listener feedback. I don't think we're getting a solo trailer for the Super Bowl. That's my gut. I'm okay with it. I'm looking forward to seeing whatever they're going to release, though. I think it's going to be great. Why? Because it's Star Wars, and I love Star Wars. Have yourself a fantastic week, and we'll talk to you next week for episode 110. Why is that special? It's an even number. That's the only reason why. May the Force be with you, always.
My Nerd World.